Whether it was the iPod, Xbox 360, or tablet, or Just Dance, you probably remember a lot of designs that looked like this. Coming soon after what is now referred to as Frutiger Aero, this late 2000s aesthetic is known as Frutiger Metro, and it was pretty weird. So, in today's video, as we look into its origins, disappearance, and places you might recognise it from, we'll attempt to find out exactly what Frutiger Metro was, and, most importantly, where it went. Frutiger Metro is characterised by elements like bright, colourful shapes, patterns, human silhouettes, and instruments. Contrasting Frutiger Aero, it focused almost entirely on flat designs, with little to no use of 3D or real-life objects. You'll notice this when looking at the people, who are typically blocked out in a single colour, remaining faceless in a fixed state of motion. It takes its name from the Metro design language created by Microsoft, an approach to UI that influenced the style of the Xbox 360, Windows 8, and more. The term Frutiger, of course, comes from Frutiger Aero, which shared a lot of the same thematic elements, particularly its focus on nature. You'll see both use swooping greens and blues, abstract and at times chaotic imagery, and references to animals. Notably, both are overwhelmingly associated with user interfaces, utilised by corporations to make their products appear more exciting and visually appealing. I'd say a big difference between the two, however, is that Metro was more often targeted towards younger demographics, being the standard choice for things like CDs, toys, and gaming. You'll see this a lot more with some of the examples later in this video. Now, putting its use into an exact time frame is hard. While it was seen early on and mostly coincided with the growth of Frutiger Aero, it became a lot more noticeable as Aero fell out of the mainstream. Consequently, it was most prominent around the mid-2000s to early 2010s, before gradually declining and taking a backseat. Today, many people see Metro as a transition point between the maximalist designs of the 2000s and the flatness and minimalism today. After all, the Microsoft design language it borrows its name from was one of the first to employ the simplified, less cluttered approach to modern UI. In its reduced focus on glossiness, 3D and HD elements, I can definitely see how it could have made the switch smoother. Going from this to this, for instance, would have been a lot more jarring. This point is also why it's often dubbed Flat Frutiger Aero, as, for the most part, it uses similar themes and icons, only without the added glossiness and depth. Anyway, one of the main things you most likely recognise from this aesthetic is music. Many associated designs feature giant speakers, people dancing or mixing, and colourful bursts that represent sound. Naturally, this brings us to CDs. Now, I'm sure almost none of you will recognise these, as they had a limited release in Australia in like 2010, but the first thing my mind went to when researching this video were these. Called Wutonia, they used to slip them into Happy Meals when you weren't looking, and I've been waiting for a follow-up album since 2010. Plenty of other covers and cases also borrowed from this aesthetic, particularly compilations of tracks or EPs. Look for the colourful swoops and random 2D instruments. You could also see this on older video game discs like Wii Sports Resort or even Rayman Origins. Games themselves were no exception, with the best example being Just Dance 3. Everything from the menus to icons fits nicely with the aesthetic. While I didn't play it all too much, I really miss when backgrounds used to look like this. It reminds me of some of the default options on Xbox 360, like this blue one with the circular patterns. Many ads also used elements of these designs. For example, the original iPod silhouette videos, which had people moving around these vibrant, different coloured backgrounds. Another great case of this is this Cox Internet ad from around 2004. You'll notice again the focus on technology, but presented through this vivid, almost surreal lens. The use of floral patterns and nature makes it seem intriguing and futuristic, but also familiar. This advertisement for Windows XP is another, with its emphasis on speakers and colourful, abstract patterns. Personally, I remember seeing a lot of this sort of artwork in textbooks. Mentally, I associate images like this and this with the corners of math, music, or any random subjects pages from the 2010s. Of course, if we want to get specific, much like other aesthetics from the 2000s, it can be divided up into numerous subcategories. Rave Metro is the term given for artwork like this, with a heavier focus on pinks, music, and dance. This Clubland Classics album cover pretty much sums it up. Funky Metro is another example, with a similar interest in music and silhouettes, but a much brighter and expansive colour palette. Contrasting both of these is Musica Metro, which uses softer pastels and gradients. You can see this a lot more in some of Just Dance 4. Flat Metro, however, references its appearance in UI, with its vector-based patterns and separation of colour. Truthfully, making these sorts of distinctions is hard, as, much like Frutiger Aero, the aesthetic is extremely broad and encompasses a wide range of different styles. Still, it is interesting to make these classifications, as it can highlight how it was used to promote different forms of media. Rave Metro, for example, used iconography linked to clubs and rock music to effectively market CDs. So where did it go, and why don't we see anything like this today? Well, one possible reason for the relative death of Frutiger Metro and Aero was that companies stopped seeing them as having practical use. Where these sorts of colourful and maximalist designs were originally made to make tech appear exciting and familiar, they were also noticeably more cluttered. So, as people began to get used to the new UIs, simplifying and flattening interfaces in the name of efficiency might have made more sense. For example, some people argue that the glossy textures of Frutiger Aero, or the abstract nature of Metro, detract from functionality. They see their characteristic additions as merely ornamental, and distractions from the true purpose of an interface or product. However, I don't entirely agree with this, especially when looking at gaming UI. I can say for sure that whenever I hopped on Xbox 360, the last thing I cared about was functionality. If anything, its vibrant backgrounds, gradients, and controls got me more excited about playing. Compare this to when I first booted up the Xbox One, and it was met with something that felt more at home on someone's PC. So, while flat, simple designs are now the norm, in favour of optimization and efficiency, I don't think this is always a good thing. When you focus entirely on these elements, you definitely lose a bit of aesthetic appeal and uniqueness. It's also worth noting that not all of the UI associated with Frutiger Metro was well received. Windows 8, for example, and other products using the Metro design language, was faced with harsh criticism. Despite its interesting presentation, Windows 8 was found to be confusing and unintuitive, being compared to a tablet with its strange start screen. Microsoft had entirely thrown out the original desktop in favour of this cluster of tiles, which was seemingly more oriented towards touch-based devices. The problem was, it was the default for everything. Consequently, users soon began telling people not to install it, or to even upgrade from Windows 7, resulting in a launch that didn't even manage to grab 10% of their own customers. Unsurprisingly, a lot of its components were left behind with the release of Windows 10, making it less likely to remain a mainstream approach and likely reducing the appeal of similar graphics. Personally, I did like this era of design. I enjoyed seeing it on things like notebooks and remember setting my background to something like this more than a few times. Growing up, it definitely felt like the cool, edgy aesthetic, more so when it was shown in darker colour combinations like these. However, I still much prefer the earlier style of Frutiger Aero, and the interfaces of operating systems like Windows Vista, partly because Metro served as a transition into modern flat design, but mostly because it could feel very commercial. For instance, a lot of the graphics used to represent it come from stock images. People would just grab these and slap them onto anything as the default way of making a product more enticing. Combined with the faceless people and random instruments, it could at times feel a bit tacky. But that's just my thoughts. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to let us know what you think in the comments, or drop by the Discord through the link in the description. This has been Extraman, and I'll see you in the next video.
The only one hearing the ghost voices.
Yeah.
That's why I brought him for proof.
And I know it's because you're not on your meds.
Exactly.